Have you ever been in a situation where you feel you're really stressed and anxiousness is just taking you over? And one thing that happens is you can't think. These situations happen to us all the time. So, how does stress really affect the person's focus? That's today, and that's what we're going to talk about. And what I really want you to understand first is that stress triggers the body's fight or flight system. We've all heard this perspective. But what I'm going to do today is give you 5 main things that really will affect that. And what happens to us when we become tunnel visioned, when we reduce our memory, we can't remember certain things. There's reasons that actually are for that. There's things that happen that drives, it's called emotionality and emotional decision making and how that happens. So these are some of the things that we're going to go through today. And one main thing that I really will emphasize on this is understand when you are in the fight or flight mode, what's happening is your cognition is being reduced. So you can't think clearly. That's where you get fog. And there's another side of your brain that's actually activating. And that's called the limbic system. Those two things are actually going at each other. And when this happens, it's an internal battle. You have to win that battle. That's what happens there. So in the brain, when you are triggered and you get that fight or flight response to activate, what happens is it's called cognitive flexibility, and you lose that. So that's what we're going to go through today. And bear in mind, as we actually do this, take note of there's some of the things that may be happening to you as you're going through some of this stuff. And so the first one is we become really tunnel visioned. And what that means is we start to prioritize immediate threat. And we're just looking at a very narrow scope of thinking. And for me as a person, when this happens, I found out that everything actually slowed down for me. It really slows down where everything's moving like slow motion. And that is something that allows the brain to actually react to the situation, but it may not happen to you. You might get overly anxious. To me, it really slows down. So it's depending on the person and how your fight or flight system actually activates your sympathetic nervous system. Now, when stressed, the brain prioritizes survival. That's what it's trying to do. So it takes all your cognitive capability and all your concentration, and it points it in that narrow direction. It's like you're looking through a lens, but not really a lens. You're looking through the sniper scope, and it's that kind of focus. The peripheral is all gone. You just have one narrow perspective into reality, and that's why we become tunnel vision. So it starts when you start to filter out all this stuff. This kind of results in the cognitive tunneling that we're talking about, but where attention becomes like super hyper focused. But the main thing here is you begin to ignore everything. The person who can really take this on is the person who can actually step back. They realize that this is happening. And when you start to step back, you start to think about, for example, if someone is like really stressed about an upcoming deadline, what happens, all you do is start to fixate on what? On that deadline. You start to ignore and everything else around you, which can be good, but it also can be bad because you're not judging the whole situation. So the most effective strategy, sometimes you need help. Sometimes you need somebody to take a look at another pair of eyes to look at the situation. This is no longer available to you. So I think at this level, you have to really understand when you get tunnel visioned, this is where it becomes a problem. Okay. You have to be able to step back. And now the second thing I want to go through is there's a reduction in working memory, and working memory is like, if you look at, they talk about, you have about 7 slots of working information. So if you look at it like a table, once one piece of information is coming in and sitting on the table, then you're bringing another piece of information from your hard drive, your mental hard drive, and you're putting it also on the table. So there's a cognitive load that is happening on the table, which is working memory. And that can be, when you're stressed, you will not be able to retrieve information that you need from your experience. This is the hell that can really ensue, because imagine you need about maybe 10 pieces of information to solve whatever the situation is, but you only have access to 2 because you're so stressed. This can be a real problem, because working memory is literally, it's your subconscious mind trying to pull out information, your conscious mind going into your subconscious mind, pulling out the information and handing you an equation to actually use to solve what the challenge is. And I think this is what separates people, with your cognitive load and what you can handle. And they actually, when people go into battle, they test some of this stuff. And the stress that is actually induced on a person, especially when it's stay up here. What you want to do is be able to regulate and come back down. The faster you come back down, the more capable you are as a person. That window, okay, of stress, don't stay up here. When you peak, okay, your stress peaks. What you want to do, let's say you stay, then you plateau, but you want to regulate. You want to be able to regulate quickly. That is the case. So some of us, I'm sorry, we can't do that. Some of us, we stay up here, and then we even use coping mechanisms that actually take us even higher. Like, let's say you start to procrastinate. That actually adds more stress. These are some of the things that you have to begin to understand about yourself. And working memory is a very powerful tool in states of stress. You need that access to solve that situation. So really think about that you want to calm yourself down as fast as possible. And some of the ways that have been calculated now in psychology is taking 2 breaths inward and then exhaling from your nose. Take 2 breaths, inhale, then you exhale. That starts to shut down your sympathetic nervous system. And when that happens, you will literally start to have more cognitive capability in what you're doing. So the prefrontal cortex is the thinking. It's responsible for executive function, which is basically problem solving, decision making, and really flexible thinking. When you are active and the cortisol is released, I'll talk about that a little bit later under the next point, but under stress, cortisol literally floods the brain. And what happens there, it impairs the prefrontal cortex. And it has a harder time in terms of the ability to hold and manipulate information. And now you're like in a state of panic where you're not thinking, you feel overwhelmed in terms of your sensations and how you might be scared, you might be angry. All these things are happening, but you don't know how to calculate. That is a scary position to be in, any human being. So this means that a person will struggle to think ahead. You'll struggle to organize tasks. You'll struggle to recall important details and information. And when this happens, this leads to mental overload, and you will have a lot of mental errors when you're actually going through this stuff. So you want to be very careful. And the brain, it needs to prioritize quickly and act automatically. And the more capable you are in terms of, let's say you get that stressor from the outside, you plateau, and the more capable you are in terms of regulating yourself and bringing yourself back to neutral, the stronger you're going to be as a person to actually activate the right decision and choose the right thing in the moment. But that stressor is going to lock and put you in a tunnel vision perspective. And when you go into tunnel vision, you know what happens? You lose access to that decision-making capability. And then you go into reduced memory. And now it's much more difficult to actually see things clearly. Now, number three. Number three is really something, how would I say this to you? I think this is, you'll start to see the internal battle of the limbic system, which is the emotional side of yourself, and the cognitive system, which is the prefrontal cortex. They're literally in a battle. It's a boxing ring, and it's happening inside of you. And when you go towards like emotional decision making, this is the amygdala in your brain, which is part of the limbic system, taking over. So when you become reactive to a situation, understand that part of your brain is what's taken over the decision-making part of your brain. And you're just reacting to things. Everything's just like black and white. You have no access to data at all. And you're just choosing by survival mechanisms. And this is where it becomes dangerous. So number one, you become tunnel visioned. Number two, your memory reduces. Number three, you become emotionally enticed, and now you start to make emotional decisions. This is where it gets really costly. And if you don't repair yourself here by calming yourself down, you're going to take the wrong positions, you're going to make the wrong decisions, and you're really going to hurt in the future. So really think about what I'm saying here, because this happens to all of us. These mechanisms are inside all of us. So when the amygdala takes over, this leads to impulsivity. It leads to decisions that are made through an emotional driver. And I think rather than being logical and understanding and analyzing a situation, you begin to do what? You begin to emotionally rationalize. And you start to emotionally cope, maybe in a situation where you should be actually thinking. So, and you become tunnel visioned. And then from there, you start losing access to memory. That's going to be very difficult. And for example, let me give you an example here. So someone under stress at this kind of level, they'll snap at a colleague. They'll, if you're under that load, they'll say something to their wife, husband, sister, brother that they shouldn't say. They'll make hasty decisions. They'll become, let's say you tell them something, they become really defensive really quickly because that frustration and they're irritated. It doesn't allow them to really think. They become reactive. This is what happens when you become tunnel vision. You get that trigger. You become tunnel vision. When that tunnel vision happens, it reduces the capability and access to memory. Then after that, you start to make emotional decisions. At this level, guys, Imam Ali alayhi salam has a beautiful hadith, and he says anger begins with madness and ends with regret. I really want you to think about this hadith, because this is exactly what he's talking about. In terms of beginning with madness, you lose your mind, and then ends with regret. When you get to step 3, you know what's going to happen? You're going to make emotional decisions and become impulsive. And when you become impulsive, you're going to regret your decisions down the line because there's going to be consequences. That's the problem, guys. That's the issue. It's an amazing hadith to see how Imam Ali alayhi salam 1400 years ago, that's discipline. He's the master of discipline. He's the master of capability. Learn from him. In this month, Ramadan is a month of discipline. It's all about telling yourself no. And when someone hands you the ability to choose and gives you choice, Allah has given us choice. When Allah has given us choice, He's also embedded with that choice. And the decisions that you make is responsibility. Responsibility requires discipline. And discipline is telling yourself no in order to really care and love yourself. That is true self-respect. When you can do that, and you can follow these equations and mental processes, then enhance the emotion and connect it to those processes, now you've become something different. Because when you apply your decisions onto the world, your consequences and your results are going to be completely different than the next person. That is the power of really understanding who you are and the way you work on the inside. We're taking science, but look at also religion, spirituality, capability to really understand not just the self, but also the soul. And when you combine that, that becomes extremely powerful in terms of a methodology or even an ideology, which is your core beliefs, what you believe in, and then applying those core beliefs through a methodology of thinking, of accepting or rejecting ideas in reality. That is extremely powerful when you can start to understand yourself at this level. Number 4, let's see what number 4 says. Okay. Now, number 4 is really powerful because this is the make it or break it point at this level. So number 1, let me just recap here real quick. Number 1 is you become tunnel. You get triggered from the outside. There's an outside stimulus. You get triggered, you get fixated, which is tunnel vision. Number 2, so tunnel vision is literally you don't have a peripheral vision. It's gone. You can't see anything. You're looking through the sniper scope. What you need to do in that moment, if you can, is step away from that. Number 2 is you lose access to memory, which is the equation. There's algorithms that in your experience, in your genetics, that will give you aid to solve this situation, but you lose access to that data. And now you're fixated, you lost memory capability. And number 3, you become emotional in terms of the limbic system activating, and you're making emotional rationalizations and decision making. Number 4 is we become cognitively rigid, which is overfixation on the problem. And what that does is stress traps the brain in a repetitive like thinking loop. And what it does is it makes it difficult to consider other alternatives that may be possible. So if let's say you're taking an exam and I'm really stressed. So think about that. I become tunnel vision. I can't see really the peripheral. I lose access to the data I just studied. Okay. Number 3, I start to get really scared. So I'm just making, I'm going to fail anyway. You know what I mean? So I start making like really not smart mistakes on the exam. And now I can't see anything else. And that's why people actually, some people, they say, I'm really good at taking exams. And some people are really bad at taking exams. It's because of this system. It's your anxiousness system. It's your sympathetic nervous system activating and staying on. What you want to do is activate, stay on. You need that stress. There's healthy stress, but prolonged stress is the one that hurts you. Now, this sometimes it refers to a cognition that does not allow the mind to return to problem-solving mode. And I think this is I would say this is one of the most important things to really think about, because problem solving is in the frontal cortex. If your brain is hijacked by your emotionality, your emotions, and the limbic system, it makes it difficult to come up with resolutions and creative problem solving. That's why number 4 is so important. You can't even get back to your system of thinking because your brain has been hijacked by the chemical codes that are inside of you now because of that stimulus, because you got afraid. And then you can't calm down. You lost access to memory. You're tunnel visioned. But the worst part of that is you can't get back to creative problem solving and actually problem solving modes. That is really, really amazing when you really think about it. It's so powerful when a person can think that way, but really represent in themselves in a stressful situation in a very eloquent way. They don't lose the power of speech. They can still talk, even if there's a sensation of fear. They can still hold themselves. That, subhanAllah, in Islam, when we actually pass through the gates of death, and when we are in that situation and we are being questioned by the angels, some of us will not be able to speak. Why? Because it's so scary. That is the same concept here. It's extremely important to understand that if you can calm yourself down in states of fear, how do you do that? One basic understanding is drop the outcome. When you can drop the outcome, there's something very special that begins to happen about you. You're letting the responsibility of the future and you're putting it in something greater than you, more capable than you, more understanding than you, more wise than you. And you submit it to that will, which is namely Allah Azza wa Jal. And when you could do that, guys, and truly feel that in a moment of fear, there's nothing more beautiful on the face of this earth that you can feel. That in the Quran it says, وَإِذَا أَلْقَى عَلَيْهِمْ مَوْجًا in Surah Luqman, he says, if a wave overtakes them, it says, يَدْعُونَ اللَّهِ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They call on to Allah. Why? Because now they have become sincere. They've lost control. When you lose control in that moment and fear strikes and you have no capability of saving yourself, where do you go? Where do you go? So when a plane is shifting you left and right, and then you realize you have no control, gravity is taken over, and you're slowly descending to the ground, what do? I guarantee you 99.99, if not 100% of people start to pray. In that moment, when you lose absolute control, you start to realize that I'm in need. If I'm in need, I become submissive to something greater than me. This is the power of spirituality and religion. But imagine if you work that spiritual muscle and you become a warrior in terms of your capabilities to calm yourself down. And I remember one story I read that there was a person that actually converted to Islam based on a person that was actually, they were going down on a plane. And because of this person's reaction to them going down on the plane, that they stayed so calm that the person started to investigate what Islam is really about. And they actually converted later, reverted. But on that level, that is power. When you can stay calm, people need that from you. Your friends, your family, people in general, they need that calmness, that stillness. When your heart can hold that kind of emotion in a situation where there's ultimate danger, you become something special. Number 5. All right. This is where I would tell you, you really gotta understand what the brain goes through. Number 1, tunnel vision. Number 2, you lose access to memory. Number 3, you become emotionally reactive and impulsive. Number 4, you lose the ability to problem solve and look at the peripheral and actually have access to creative decision making and problem solving. Number 5 is when the brain actually maximizes and it stays under a stress load for a long time, it begins to lose its capability because it's burned off basically all your resources, your energy, and the brain starts to come back down. Because you couldn't calm yourself down, the brain will automatically start to go down. This phase is actually depression. It could be minor or major depression, depending on the person. But when you go through this process and then you go through stress, turns into anxiety. And then when you maintain this level of anxiety up here, then eventually the brain runs out of energy and you start to go back down automatically. It's going to shut you down automatically if you can't do it yourself. This turns into what though? Depression. You start to feel bad. You don't have energy. And this is where you become foggy. You can't think anymore. To me, on this level, if a person understands that, if your heart is emotionally foggy, okay, and you can't see, this is where, to me, you really need access to other people and you really need access to help. Okay. However you make decisions at that moment, you really need somebody to be around you. Because when we become tunnel visioned, we lose access to memory. We are emotionally impulsive. And then we have no creativity in terms of our decision making. And we are in a stage of burnout and we still haven't made the decision. This is where you need good people around you. You need friends here. And you need really good friends, but not just good friends, experienced friends, wise friends, knowledgeable friends. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. So on that level, this is key. This is key in terms of what we're doing. And why does this happen in terms of these kinds of things? Is that okay? Yes. But at the end of the day, there's issues here that we have to work through. So now, I want to let you know that this is a situation that can happen to any one of us. It allows us to actually go through things, but also we can fumble going through the process. So on that level, I'm going to leave it here, guys. This is our first, I would say, if you can, again, this is our first attempt at running some of our new equipment we've actually set up. We're going through Instagram live now. We have some, our stuff is just going to get better and better, hopefully, in terms of what we're doing. But also visit the website. We have some really cool things on there. There's so many things that we're going to be putting up, guys, there. So do that. I'm going to leave it here because the fasting just really dries up your mouth and you really can't go for that long. But, okay, so I'm getting informed that we have a few questions. So give me for the first question.
Okay. Why some people have sympathetic nervous system and can't regulate the stress and anxiety?
Okay, a sensitive nerve, you can be high on neuroticism. And neuroticism under the 5-factor model is you're maybe biologically encoded there. You're biologically more anxious, let's say. And that could be the case. But people like that are also connected because they enjoy people. They're longing for relationships if you're high in anxiety. It doesn't mean that it's just a bad thing. No, you're a lot more sensitive to your environment. So there's many techniques, and that's why prayer is so important, guys. Establishing prayer. وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِ. When you remember Allah in a state of fear, that is calmness. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Surely with the remembrance of Allah, do hearts become tranquil. They become still, calm. So when you establish prayer, you begin to remember Allah in a state where you wouldn't normally do that if you didn't pray. Because that cognitive muscle is being used. When you do that and you establish prayer properly, Allah comes to you when you need Him. And Allah is always there. You just turn your face towards Allah in the right moment. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَحُولُ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَقَلْبِهِ. Know that Allah is written between you and your heart. Where is that space? That's Allah tweaking and allowing you to move back and forth. You gotta establish that relationship. If you want calmness in your life, you want a heart that is tranquil. You want a heart that is still. You want a heart that is calm. Build that relationship. Find God's address in your own heart. It's there. It's already there. You just have to jump into your ocean, which is your subconscious mind. And when you do that and go deep diving, meaning use your submarine equipment, don't use snorkel gear and just play at the surface. No, go to the depths of who you are. Find that address, God's address in your heart. And it's very near. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَى. If my worshiper, my supplicator, my servant asks you about me, tell him I am near. I will answer the call. If the person calls. So when you start to do that, Allah is always near. He's closer to you than your own jugular vein. We all know these things. But can you apply emotionally when needed? That's the hard part. We understand the concepts, but have you submitted emotionally to the concept? That is where the gold is. So dive into your own subconscious mind. Knock on Allah's door and knock on His address and say, please help me. And remember Him in a state of fear. And He says, Allah, remember me, I will remember you. That is safety. So you want godly safety, not human safety. There's a difference. And it's so beautiful when you can connect at that level in a state of fear. You want to feel calmness and you want to feel the most beautiful things on the face of this earth. Connect to a godly aspect. And you'll realize that that's the source and everything else is a resource. So that's the first. I hope that answers your question. What's the second one?
Okay. I'm feeling stressed right now because I have feelings for someone and the odds are that is impossible. I'm stressed out about it. What to do?
Okay. So, okay. And this question, when we don't have access to people, I would say I'll put it this way. If a person that you're relying on for, let's say, ask yourself, is this person are you in need of this person that they become like your oxygen? If that's the case, you place them on a pedestal. And if you place them on a pedestal, then they rip away that oxygen. Who's going to be hurting? It's going to be you. So when you attach to someone, understand that that's the most vulnerable position you can ever be in. Because what you're doing is you're handing access to your heart and your emotions to someone else. And if they rip themselves away and they attach to you and they rip themselves away, then you're going to feel the pain. And that's why you're feeling anxious. That's why, because that person is probably distant from you. And if that person becomes a source of safety above Allah Azza wa Jal, then you're really in trouble because you have nowhere to go. That person's got you by the neck. And especially if they know how to manipulate this system that I'm talking to you about. This is extremely dangerous and you put yourself in a very vulnerable position. So what you need to do is realize that there's three relationships. Your relationship with God, which is Allah Azza wa Jal, your relationship with yourself, and your relationship with another person. If you give complete power over yourself to another person, okay, you're going to lose. And this is going to suffer. Your first relationship is going to suffer because you're going to put this person in a pedestal perspective, which is almost like some people begin like they want to worship another person to that extent that they become this vulnerable. They'll do anything they say. They'll go anywhere. They'll literally become super submissive to that person because you're giving a person access to a place that only belongs to who? To Allah Azza wa Jal. That place in your heart only belongs to Allah. That security is godly security, not human security. So you flip the equation. What you need to do is when you connect to Allah properly and you build that godly security, you become more confident. And when this person, you're actually getting to know them and you're in a relationship, you're not going to attach quickly. What happens is you become more wise. You're more confident. You're more capable because your reliance is where? On this source, not this source. My emotional voids are filled with a godly source. That is the key. When that happens, you become more fulfilled. You become abundant. You become a giver. You become extremely powerful. You become strong. You become distant if you need to. And you have no emotional voids. When you're like that, then what happens on this side is you can say, no, I don't like this. I don't want that. And you're not emotionally dependent on this person. And when you could do that and your emotions are not dependent on this person, guess what? I'll take care of you. But if you try to do something with me, I can detach willingly. Not to hurt you, but to actually help you. Because you're not good for me and I'm not good for you. That is extremely powerful when you begin to understand these three relationships. Relationship with God, relationship with yourself, and relationship with others. Don't put others as the number one relationship. You will lose. Put Allah Azza wa Jal as your primary relationship. When you can do that, you become the secondary because your connection is to Him. And then third is other people. So when someone wants to fill up your bucket, you tell them what? My bucket's already full. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm overflowing with goodness, with happiness, with capability, but most of all with security. That is power. And then give me great because I don't need it. But at the end of the day, I'm going to give you, but I want nothing in return. That is extremely powerful. I'll end it there, guys, because that's one of my favorite subjects, by the way, because when you begin to connect to Allah properly, the sensation of security is one of the most beautiful things you'll ever feel. All right. Take care, guys. I'll see you next time. Visit the website. It's covisiontraining.com, and I'll see you next week.